Legal. You could probably sue. Huh. Hey, Alex, are you the one that made the report earlier? Hey, yeah, but I think I'm good. I'm about to get fired. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, Frank's about to fire me, but it's okay, because then I can sue, so hopefully I can get some money. Okay, so I'm actually on my way to fire Frank, so we can avoid anything like that. No, it's okay. Let Frankie do his thing. I'm trying to buy a new car and get out of my hoopty. Frank, I had a right to...
Okay, I don't know if I've started. Yep, I sure have. Uh-oh. Screwing up already. Messing up my pod already. Anywho, let's go live here. I can never get my cameras to do exactly what I want them to do. I feel like I'm going to freeze up. No, not yet. Okay. Is everything still working? Let's take a look. Yep, everything's still working. So weird. I don't know how any of this stuff works. Anyway, just thought I'd pop in here for a bit and do a little chit chat. I saw this article today. I just thought I'd comment on it. I know everybody wants to talk about the school shooting. I don't like to talk about those things because I don't think it's the time to be. It's just to me, it's not a political issue. It's just not the school shooting stuff. It's we're not going to solve that problem through legislation. Sorry, if that's not how you feel about it, that's perfectly fine. At the end of the day, there's you're not changing anybody's mind, right? And I don't think politicians want to address the actual issues at hand. And I think using a tragedy like that as some kind of a wedge issue so that you have something to talk about, something to get your voters riled up about. At the end of the day, nobody's going to do anything about it. It's not going to change. It's one of those weird things where it's like we shouldn't have to accept this as a way of life, but we kind of have to accept it as well until we solve the problem. All I'll say about it is this: you have these things happen because the mass shooter in general is somebody who simply wants they go after soft targets, period. If you don't want to protect schools, then you're not going to solve the problem. And it really gets that simple. You have to make schools hard targets because a soft target's gonna draw what it's gonna draw. It's just what's gonna happen. So as sad as it may be, that's just the reality of the situation. But I'm here to talk about the upcoming election. I'm here to talk about this little article that I read today, and I'll bring it up here. See if I can get some opinions on it. I'm going to try and make this a little bit bigger, a little bit more visible. Let's see, so it's a little bit more legible. So people can read it. I don't know what this looks like on the other platform, of course. Let's open Studio here. Take a look. Oh, I gotta go. I gotta actually push the button there, don't I? Oh, no, there we go. Okay, so, all right. Imagine you're trying to learn calculus. You're in a classroom with some students who've been doing high level math for years and others who've only learned basic addition, but no one can level up until everybody learns calculus. Oh, and by the way, the school building is on fire. I don't know about anybody else. I really don't. Aren't we getting a little tired of this? Isn't this getting a little old? Are we still in a place where we review race as the big issue in a campaign? Is that still where we are? For me, the issues of race, when they bring racism into this conversation, it's nothing more than a deflection. There's a couple of things at play here. First and foremost is that the Democrats know that they cannot win. This is well known. The Democrats cannot win an election without the black vote. Okay, so it behooves them it behooves Democrat candidates to make sure that the African American community is always going to view themselves as outsiders, as oppressed. That's if they don't view themselves that way, the Democrats don't have anything else to sell them. If you don't view yourself as oppressed, if you don't view yourself as needing the government to intervene on your behalf in order to make your life better, then there's no reason to vote for people who have nothing to offer but bad economic policy aimed at, essentially, it's handout politics, right? If you don't view yourself in the light of I'm a victim, then there really is no reason to vote for the Democrats. Okay. On the flip side of this, I would say that more and more of late, I would say that Donald Trump is actually presenting ideas in regards to downsizing the state. So the conversation really needs, for me anyway, from the political perception, the conversation really needs to focus on whether or not we believe our government has grown beyond its intended size, its intended purpose, whether or not dumping more money into the government is going to solve any of our problems. Man, I got a new chair today, and I'll tell you something. It seats higher, topping the top of my head off. This makes for good video, but I'm going to raise up my cameras here. Oh yeah, I'm a professional, by the way, in case you guys are wondering. I am dialed into this whole online thing. I can't get myself hilarious. I can't get myself to dive into the TikTok environment, like to really get into the whole, there's all this back and forth and all this contention and like the different creators on here going after each other. I can't get myself into that ecosystem. It doesn't appeal to me. So anyway, back to my point is I'm trying to find people who want to have a conversation about actual policy, and you just can't find people who want to talk about policy. They want to talk about race. They want to talk about, Trump's felony cases. They want to talk about Kamala Harris's fake accents. They don't want to talk policy. And I don't know if that's just a sign of the electorate just not being bright. And I hate to say that. It sounds incredibly elitist for me to say so. I don't know which camera's doing what here. That camera's there. This camera isn't doing anything. Oh my God. It's just a mess. And so I don't really know, honestly, I don't really know how to have a conversation with people in regards to policy, because it just doesn't seem like anybody wants to talk policy anymore. Whoa, look how big my face is when I do that. I don't like that at all. Nobody wants to see that much of me. But at the end of the day, I guess you gotta get on here and you gotta do some things. So chat's open and I'm willing to take questions. I mean, maybe even be able to bring somebody up, but I don't really know if I could do this the same way through the through Live Studio, the way I would do it normally. This video is going to do great on YouTube, by the way. All this fixing the cameras and getting that stuff going on. I wasn't even planning on going live tonight, but it's been a couple of days, so I just wanted to jump in here. So I haven't even. Oh, here's a great one. This is one of my favorites. Book bans are accelerating across the country amid right-wing pressure campaign. Let's bring this up here. Let's see. Oh my God, I hate the way this all works. Let's just do that. You know what I need is I need like a producer. I need somebody who can run the tech side of this thing for me. That would be great. But book bans. Can we talk about this for a minute? Can we talk about what a book ban is? There are no book bans currently in the United States. There's not a book that's illegal for you to own. There's no subject you cannot talk to your kids about in the privacy of your own home. We curate public libraries. In particular, we curate school libraries and say, look, you want to give this stuff to your kids at home, you want to talk to your kids about this stuff, you want to buy this book off of Amazon, you certainly can, but we're going to curate this. We don't want this in the schools. We don't think this is appropriate for the schools. Schools are supposed to do that. I'm tired of the left being able to just use whatever language they want and go, well, that's a book ban. It's not a book ban. Saying that it can't be in a school library is not banning a book. I mean, there's tons of stuff we don't want in in our school libraries. We don't want porn in our school libraries. We don't want that. And nobody's going to say it's banned. You just can't put it in a school. So let's take a look here. America's right-wing forces would have you believe that they are the courageous entity standing up for free speech. But as they try to claim that mantle, many of those same forces in media and politics are behind a disturbing wave of book bans sweeping the nation. PEN America, a nonprofit organization committed to protecting free expression, published an alarming report Tuesday indicating that the book ban crisis is only getting worse. The bans are speeding up. The organization warned in its report a troublesome trend that is impacting public school systems from coast to coast. There's certain books that they're keeping off of school shelves. Look, we can have the debate. They banned books like To Kill a Mockingbird, Brave New World, 1984, because of, speech and things that they don't think are appropriate for kids. And I think those books are important for people to read. But those books they're not banned. You can still buy that book and have your kid read it. They just are saying that it shouldn't be in the public schools. And we can debate over individual books. We can debate over whether or not parents have a right to be involved in what stuff is being put in front of their kids. We can do all that stuff. But to call it a book ban is just disingenuous. It's one of these tools of language that they use to make it seem like something is happening that is not happening. There were over 4,000 instances of book bans in the first half of this school year, more than all of last school year as a whole. This is a marked increase in comparison to the last spring semester, in which PEN America recorded 1,841 book bans. The group said in the report, aptly titled Banned in the USA, the ban started in haste in early 2021, birthed in the backlash to Nicole Hannah Jones's 1619 project at the New York Times. So here's a great example of do we debate whether or not certain material is appropriate for kids. So let's teach. I have no problem teaching historical fact. Let's teach historical fact in the schools. The United States had slaves. The United States did this. Right. Fine. The 1619 project is an ideological and sociological study of those things and what their impacts are today. And it really kind of tries to paint the slave trade as something that was taking place almost solely in the United States, as if the United States of America is what created slavery, which is obviously not true. And I would take it a step further and say, not only did Western civilization not invent slavery, not create slavery, but that Western civilization actually ended it. I mean, when did slavery stop in Britain? It stopped in the United States. To this day, there's slaves in Africa. To this day, there's slaves in the Middle East. So the 1619 project is the kind of thing that a parent could go, well, look, I don't like this view of history, this opinion of historical fact, not actual historical fact, but this opinion of what of history is, and I don't want my kids exposed to it. It's an ideological teaching. It's not a historically accurate, factual teaching of history. So, but then again, we're arguing semantics. It's not a book ban. Stop calling it that. That's not what it is. And I don't like that language because it makes it, you're trying to paint the people who don't agree with you as something that they are clearly not. You don't have to, I'm not a Republican. I haven't voted for Republicans. But these aren't book bans. Nobody's saying these books should not be available. Nobody's saying these books should be illegal. Let's see. People are fine with labor being stolen if it's partial and called taxes or total and called a draft. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point, because if 100% of your labor is being absconded by authority, by power, through force, that's slavery. So what percentage of your labor is it okay to steal? Is it okay to take through force before it's slavery? I don't know what percentage of my wife and I's income is collected in taxes between income tax and sales tax and property tax and everything else. Easily 30 to 40% of what we earn disappears through the process of taxation. So when does that become? When can we start categorizing that as a crime against humanity, which is what slavery is, right? At what point? Well, how much of what I earn do I have to surrender to the state before we go? Well, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. So that's an interesting question. And the 1619 project is kind of this whole. I mean, for me, it's the whole deal. It's CRT in a way when you think about critical race theory and the idea that we shouldn't have critical race theory in schools. It's kind of like critical race theory. What they'll say is, and this is something that people who've never read any of it will fall for, is, well, they're just trying to ban Black history, and well, that's not the case. It's not banning Black history. CRT isn't a history lesson. It's a sociology course. It's an advanced sociology course. I have no problem with that being taught maybe in high schools if there is a balance in that education. I have no problem with it being taught in colleges if there's a balance to that education. But critical race theory takes true historical events and then through the lens of history says this is how it's impacting people today. But it doesn't give enough of a deep dive to me to accurately paint that picture. Somebody who's read it. So if I say, I don't think this critical race theory book should be on a school shelf, am I banning the book? No, I'm saying I don't think this is appropriate because it's a one-sided sociological view. And especially for middle schoolers, it's probably an advanced topic that they're not going to dive into. Look, if you understand how public schools are functioning right now, they don't have the ability to teach this complex issue with any level of nuance whatsoever. This is an ideological indoctrination to some extent. That is the only way I think I can adequately describe it. So some of the books removed from schools across the country include Margaret Atwood's I just mentioned it. I hadn't read the article, but I just mentioned this book, acclaimed dystopian novel turned Hulu adaptation, The Handmaid's Tale. Oh, Margaret Atwood. Sorry, I mentioned Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale is a great book, by the way. If all you've ever watched is the Netflix or the Hulu, adaptation of it, read the book. It's an amazing book. I think that it's a book that if it's analyzed properly in an educational environment, and we talk about the threat of totalitarianism, the threat of authoritarianism. But the problem is that a lot of times we take these lessons, we take these books that have these great messages in them, and then we try to twist them from an ideological bent. Obviously, The Handmaid's Tale is the fear of the anti. It's a justifiable fear of the far right, the theocracy that can exist when we start legislating morality, which is the problem I have with the Republicans. They want to legislate morality all the time, and I don't think you can do that. So Margaret Atwood's book's a great cautionary tale on that, but you kind of counter that by saying, the left can go too far as well. Like, this isn't a one-sided thing where it's like there's only one bad guy here, and we don't have to fear the other side going too far. I just watched a video about something like 2,600. I don't know. TikTok's going to take me down on this. If they do, I'm on another platform. Follow my link tree, but 2,600 mastectomies for underage girls. That's a double mastectomy. That's breast removal of teenage girls. This is another thing that I think the left, when we talk about the use of language, we talk about book banning. That's not what's happening. The other tactic they use is to say this isn't happening. Something's not happening. They don't like the position. If they think that it's a bad position to defend, they'll just say that the thing isn't happening. You're getting the same thing at the border, where it's like, oh no, we don't have a border crisis. We don't have all these people coming across the border. And it's like, well, that's patently false. The numbers are there. We know that this thing is happening. But I guess we'll just pretend that it's not, because we can't defend our open border position. And therefore we'll just pretend that it's not happening. And then we don't have to answer for it, and we don't have to do anything about it. And then we're not guilty of allowing it to happen, because we're just simply going to deny the fact that it's taking place. And that's a dangerous thing. We should be able to have honest conversations about these positions, without being so disingenuous in our language, without actually denying the obvious facts of the things that are actually taking place. Amy Reed's novel, The Nowhere Girls. I'm not familiar with it. Not going to comment it. Milk and Honey, Between the World, Me and Others. Those who want to ban books are attempting to use obscenity law and hyperbolic rhetoric about porn in schools to justify banning books about sexual violence and LGBTQ plus topics, and in particular trans identities. In doing so, they have also disproportionately targeted books by women and non-binary authors. PEN America said the movement to ban books also continues to focus on themes of race and racism by advancing rhetoric disparaging critical race theory, woke ideology, and efforts to ensure library collections are diverse and inclusive. I mean, is anybody trying to ban Roots? Is anybody trying to ban the book Roots? Is anybody trying to ban these stories, these historically accurate stories? I just don't think that that's what's taking place. I think that when you look at the trans community and trans ideology, and you look at critical race theory, these are ideologies. This isn't education. This is the pushing of a particular ideology, a particular worldview, right? And I think another interesting thing for me on this is that we have this idea that we have the separation of church and state. So we can't teach religion in schools. I agree with that. We shouldn't push religion in schools, but that's because we don't want to indoctrinate kids into an ideology. We don't want to. The schools aren't designed for that. And I would say the exact same thing would apply to these other left side ideologies. But school isn't about ideology. School is about math and history and reading. And when you look at the failure rate of our public schools right now, and the number of kids who can't read at grade level and all these things, I don't think the schools have the room or the expertise to bring these incredibly complex topics in front of students, particularly students who are still incredibly impressionable and are of middle school age. I don't think it's appropriate. During Gamergate, they said it was racist. Same with the backlash to woke Hollywood and CRT. I don't know what Gamergate is. I'm sorry. I'm not a very hip person. But everything gets framed in this. They can't be. Oh man, I just lost my train of thought completely. So let me just back in. Such brazen book bans, unprecedented in modern American history, is at its worst in the red states of Florida and Texas. In Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law last year that led to the removal of books from public school shelves, more than 5,100 books were banned between July 2021 and December 2023. In Texas, the number was more than 1,500. The bans have also led to harassment against the authors who suddenly find themselves hurled into the information wars. Now, I think that's wrong. Let an author write. Okay, let's not attack people who are writing, who are expressing their opinions. I don't want to attack people because they have a different viewpoint than I do. We should, and this is an interesting thing, right? So, and this is what I mean when we get into these ideological conversations. On the one hand, we want these things. We get angry at the right because the right's banning these books that have an ideological bent, and we get angry at them. We're saying they're banning books. They're oppressing free speech. On the flip side, the left is saying we should ban hate speech. Look at the laws in Germany. In Germany, you can get arrested now for posting the wrong thing on social media. So that's what I mean when I say we have to talk about how both sides can go too far. It's possible for both sides to go too far in this ideal. And that's what you got to do is you got to defend free speech, but the schoolhouse is not the place for that. In the schools, we have the responsibility as adults to curate what's being put in front of our kids. Now, nobody who's angry about these book bans has read all of these books. 5,000 books in Florida, they said, 1,500 books. Nobody's read all these books, right? And so they are using, obviously, obscenity laws and things of that nature to say this book violates this law. But nobody's read all of these books. But at the end of the day, what do you want in your schools? And do we have a right to curate that? If the school board and the parents in one state don't want certain ideological texts on their bookshelves, and in California they do because people are different, then that's fine. Let the parents educate their kids along these other lines the way they see fit. And I think there's this new distrust almost of parents, particularly And this is something I'm seeing more from the left than I am from the right. There's this distrust of parents that the state has the right to, the state owns your kids. The states have the right to teach your kids whatever they want, whether you like it or not. And very public school has a pro-government ideological bent. And it's hard to, what they say, if you send your children off to Caesar, don't be surprised when they come back as Romans. So PEN America said Tuesday that there is one glimmer of hope, growing resistance to the bans. Every major publisher is now actively supporting a legal case to halt book banning in Iowa and across the country. Ordinary people are getting involved to put an end to the trend. We see students at the forefront, leading protests, read-ins, marching to oppose censorship and educational censorship in particular, happening and plaguing their schools and school libraries. And of course, we're joined by the incredible voices of authors. And this is what I mean is, okay, if these kids want these books so bad, let their parents provide it to them. This isn't it. The public school is not the place to hash out some of these things, particularly, like I said, and a lot of this is based on what's appropriate for what age. And I think that's the part of this that's kind of getting left out here. They're not saying what level of schools. I don't know that I'm not hearing a lot of high school book bans. I'm hearing middle school book bans taking place. I hear the middle schools taking books off the shelves. So now I'm using the phrase book ban. See, they're getting me with the freaking language. So I just don't, I'm not buying it. I don't believe that we have a book banning issue in this country. I don't think that's a problem. But I think that they're winning that language battle, where they're able to frame the conversation semantically of the way that they want to frame this conversation. On to politics a little bit. Democrat lawmaker. Let's see what this is. I always like it when I hear somebody switching sides. Because I'm like, what is the ideological, like, what are your principled beliefs that have changed? What's the fundamental change in your way of viewing the world that has made you switch from one political party to another? So Gloria Romero, former Democrat majority leader in the California State Senate, has announced that she is switching to the Republican Party and will be voting for former President Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. I think that is a pretty bold move for someone in California. And I like it from a principled perspective, only in that she's in California. She's switching to the Republican ticket and backing Donald Trump, which means she's going to lose her next election. Now, maybe she's just trying to get famous. I guess that's a possibility. But speaking on Fox News, Romero said that the Democrat Party has moved so far to the left, it's been the party that marched towards war, towards censorship, towards authoritarianism. So see, when we talk about censorship, when we talk about book banning, we don't talk about hate speech and the desire to stifle. This is the left's fight. So we have two political parties really that you could point to and say both these people have, to some extent, a desire to oppress or suppress speech in this country. So it's just kind of an interesting way to look at this thing. It's like they're both fighting to limit what people are being exposed to. Romero served in office from 1998 to 2010, initially as a member of the California State Assembly, served as a majority leader of the California State Senate. In 2021 California gubernatorial recall election, she endorsed the Republican Larry Elder as a replacement candidate for Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom. My biggest disconnect with my old party now has been over school choice, education freedom, and the right to have quality schools for all, especially as Congressman Kevin Kiley and I have fought together, especially for school choice for poor and minority children who are trapped in chronically failing schools as per KRCA 3. You know what's interesting about that for me is that school choice is something that the left opposes drastically. So it's an interesting concept where they are angry about the banning of books. They think that children should have this freedom to be exposed to all this different material and all these different things. But at the same time, they're not necessarily big on school choice. Shouldn't we also have that? Shouldn't that also be a bit of educational freedom in terms of being able to go and choose what school I'm going to send my kid to? I've never understood the passionate opposition to allowing the money to follow the student, that we fund students, not institutions, so that if an institution starts to fail, and I think trust in institutions is at an all-time low, that if an institution is starting to fail, that it is time to move us away from that institution, that we should be able to escape that institution and go seek better outcomes elsewhere. I don't understand that from the pro democracy crowd, from the, we our kids should be able to access all this different material. Well, then let's have school choice, and then we'll have a market that caters to all the different whims of all these different people who want different things for their um from their from their schools. I got a comment here that says, "So I learned Spanish and get a Colombian wife." I can't comment on that. I don't have a Colombian wife myself, but hey, man, you gotta do what you gotta do, Mr. Day. Thanks for popping in and dropping a comment. I appreciate it. As you can see, I'm swamped with viewers here. I got to start doing a better job on these things. Anyway, Romero ran for the California State Superintendent of Public Instruction in 2010 and lost, finishing third in the race. She went on to lead the California chapter of Democrats for Education and Reform, which supports the privatization of public schools. This is a Democrat party that I no longer recognize. And I think this is what this is kind of what I'm waiting for. This is what I don't understand. This election to me is going to be fascinating because I just can't bring myself to believe that the majority of mainstream Democrats agree with what's going on in the Democrat Party. I look at like a guy like Bill Maher, who I don't like, I don't agree with. I think he's wrong on just virtually every policy position that he has. But I listen to him talk and I go, where are the other Democrats saying these things? What is this crazy lunacy that's taking place with this woke? It's almost like everybody's afraid to stand up to it. And the Democrats accuse the Republicans of it. Maybe they're right, with the Democrats or the Republicans kind of demagoguing, that might not be the right word. The Trump worship. Let's just say the Trump worship in the Republican Party. And you go, oh man, how can you be loyal to this guy? You're brainwashed, you're in a cult, so on and so forth. Okay, fine. I can see it. Look, I've talked to Republicans, strong MAGA supporters, and the red hats and the whole bit. And I'm like, I don't understand. You have a 4-year presidency of Donald Trump to look back on. How could you think that this is the guy who's going to turn? He had it 4 years to drain the swamp. He didn't do it. He didn't do anything. He governed as a moderate, really as a moderate Democrat. So how is he the savior of the right? I don't get it. I don't get the love. I don't understand the Donald Trump love, but then I don't understand the loyalty that the Democrats have to their party when their party is going off the deep end. We know what's going on in California. We know what's going on in these big Democrat-run cities. It's like, where's this loyalty coming from? How are they still representing you with some of these policies? I mean, look, I posted this on Twitter the other day, and I just said Donald Trump is for tariffs and mass deportation. These are two things I have a real problem with. Tariffs, historically speaking, are just a bad idea. It's just a bad economic idea. Mass deportation is going to come at the cost of a massively expanding police state. There's just no way around it. You're not going to deport 10 million people without massively expanding the size and scope of the police state, which is terrifying to me. And he doesn't have a comprehensive plan to actually fix the immigration situation. Neither party does. Okay. So those are two terrible policies from Donald Trump. On the flip side, you got Kamala Harris, who wants to institute price controls on groceries to stop price gouging. They don't want to call it price controls. They call it, it's anti-price gouging legislation. And all I can think of when I hear that is, who in the food distribution chain is seeing these huge profit margins that you could justify a piece of legislation that calls it price gouging? I don't understand that. How are you going to say that? Who is it? Is it the grocery stores with their 1% to 2% margins? Is it the truck drivers? Is it the farmers? Like who are you going to squeeze here, money wise, to get this price gouging thing under control? How are you going to, like, what's the who in that chain of distribution, production and distribution of food are you going to go after for price gouging? Who's making these massive profits? So I don't understand that policy. And then on the flip side of that, along with her policies is the idea that we're going to give $25,000 to first-time home buyers. Well, The problem isn't that there's not enough demand, and this is a demand side solution. We're going to put money in. Well, let's say you have 1 million people right now who are sidelined because they don't have the down payment money for a house. So let's bring 1 million new people into the housing market. Well, what's that going to do to housing prices? What's going to push housing prices? This is simple supply and demand stuff. The problem is there's not enough affordable housing in the market to solve this problem. We need to attack zoning, and we need to attack a lot of things that are preventing the construction of affordable housing. Not the probably the biggest thing, and this has kind of always been my position on the housing market issue, is that we need more rental properties. We need more multi-unit, and I'm not talking about duplexes. I'm talking about apartment complexes to be built. That's what needs to happen, because rent should be the housing market in the natural state of the market. Okay. The housing market should be competing with the rental market. Rents should be so much lower than housing that people have the opportunity to go and rent for significantly less than a mortgage is going to cost them, so that they have an opportunity to save, and that housing prices have to stay. Well, there's some regulation that takes place between those two things. If we're building enough rental properties and rent is cheap enough, people will choose to rent until they get themselves into a financial position where they can buy a home. And as such, demand on housing comes down because there's all these other more affordable options out there. And if you look at county zoning, if you look at local zoning laws, you'll see that we're blocking that. There's this NIMBY, not in my backyard, no growth, no, we don't want to build this kind of stuff because, guys like me who own their house are going to say, oh, my home value is going to go down. And so the issue is that, and that's a local issue. That's an issue of local politics. That's not a federal issue. People just have to get involved with their city council and their county boards and all this stuff to get that, and their state houses and whatnot, to get that kind of stuff overturned. But putting $25,000, handing out these $25,000 vouchers, handouts, whatever you want to call them, for people to go and have more money doesn't solve the problem. It's just going to push housing prices up. Now, on the other side of this argument is the Republicans saying, well, everybody's house is going to go up $25,000 in value. Well, that's not going to happen. You can't holistically say that housing prices are going to go up dollar for dollar for this subsidy, but it's definitely going to push demand up, which is going to push up cost. So neither of these people have good economic plans to solve any of these problems that are really taxing Americans. The other side of this, and I keep saying the other side of this, must be my catchphrase, but the other part of this argument is, and this is a conversation I've been having with a lot of people, is we're just spending too much freaking money. I mean, can we get to a point where we look at what we were spending pre-pandemic and post-pandemic and say, well, would it be crazy to say we need to get our government back to pre-pandemic spending levels? Let's cut the size of the federal government. And this is where Trump's running on that, but I have my doubts because he had 4 years to do it, and he didn't shrink the size of the government. He ran a massive deficit, spent a ton of money, and the Trump supporters will come out and they'll say, well, he was fighting the pandemic and all this, that, and the other. And I did a video on this during the pandemic, and I just said, well, how are you going to stimulate? He passed this massive stimulus package. I can't remember what it was called. I want to say STARS, but I don't think that's right. But he passed this massive the CARES Act, passed that massive stimulus package, and to stimulate the economy. And I'm just thinking to myself, well, how are you trying to stimulate an economy that's shut down? That doesn't make any sense. It's not, so all that pent up inflation that the Republicans are trying to blame on Biden. And so you can tell I'm not partisan here. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. You can tell I'm not a partisan. I hope that's coming across. You have this massive inflation. Well, you printed all this money during the pandemic. You sent people all these checks. You did all these different things to put money into the economy. And well, guess what happens? There's a bunch of pent up demand. So of course, when the economy opened, there was all this money that went flowing into the marketplace. And so, yeah, guess what? We have inflation. The idea that you can just blame that on Joe Biden, not that Biden's policies were terrible, and the Inflation Reduction Act and all that stuff is a bunch of garbage legislation that also hurt. But you printed all this money during the pandemic. You passed the CARES Act, which, by the way, the Democrats supported as well. It was a bad bill. We shouldn't have been spending all that money while the economy was shut down. We shouldn't have been trying to push a string, for lack of a better analogy, trying to we'll just dump all this money into the economy that we're not letting people spend. And when the economy finally flipped open, there was all this cash that flooded in and we pushed up prices. And that's what happens. Not only to mention the disruptions of the supply chain and all that other stuff, but, and that brings me to another policy. And this was an AOC. AOC was, I think, kind of pivotal in this policy. And that was the eviction moratorium. Well, I can give you a personal, like kind of a personal example of this. Is my dad was a farmer and his barn burnt down. And so he collected this insurance money from the fire on his farm. He's old, he's disabled. He took that money, bought a couple of rental properties. Well, now he's got 2 rental properties, which is essentially his entire income. He's not some wealthy landlord. He's bought 2 lower end rental properties, and he's got people in there who aren't paying him rent. And he can't get them out of there. So that's just income that got taken away. So he has no desire to go back into, he ended up selling those properties, and he has no desire to go back to being a landlord. My wife and I have considered getting into, hey, maybe buy an investment property and rent it out. Well, I don't know. From a legislative perspective, there's a lot of risk now where what happens if we get there wasn't a mortgage moratorium. They still have to pay the mortgages and the property taxes and the upkeep on all these buildings that you're not allowed to collect rent on. So then you wonder why big corporations like BlackRock and whatever are coming in and buying up houses. Well, they're coming in and buying up houses because they can afford that risk. That's an asset for them. That's all it is. It's part of a portfolio. Anything that drives up housing prices is good for them. So you've essentially intimidated small landlords out of the marketplace through this act. And now you have less small landlords. So you're going to have more corporate landlords now. So it's just it's just bad policy on bad policy on bad policy. And when I say I want to have a conversation about policy and nobody seems to want to have that conversation, it's like, you can't criticize either side. You can't criticize the Republicans or the Democrats to a Republican or a Democrat because all they want to do is defend their team against your accusation, no matter how accurate it may be. And no matter how clear it is that this is bad policy, they're going to defend it. I've used this example in the past. I'm going to use it again. I always think, as a Green Bay Packer fan, got NFL kickoff this weekend, Packers Eagles tomorrow. As a Packer fan, I remember the Dez Bryant catch that was ruled incomplete. And to this day, doesn't matter how many angles you show the catch at, doesn't matter how slow you play it back. Packer fans say it's not a catch. Cowboys fans say it is a catch. And I feel like that's where we are in this country when it comes to political discourse. All we're doing is defending our team, and we're not looking at the facts, and we're not looking at the policies that are in place. And we can't even have an intelligent debate about it, which is why all we get from our politicians is mudslinging nonsense, because nobody wants to have a serious conversation about policy. That's hard. That's time consuming. And quite frankly, you may say something wrong or stupid. And I don't think anybody wants to be wrong anymore. Nobody wants to risk saying something and exposing themselves to a correction. Like, nobody wants to learn, because you learn by saying dumb things to smart people and having smart people tell you why you're wrong. And then you have to go back and you have to do a little bit of homework and you have to learn a little bit more. And I don't think that we have a thirst for that in this country anymore. It's like, all we want to do is be right and have our preconceived notions. We'd rather hear comforting lies than hard truths. I think that's probably the most apt description of the electorate in the United States right now. And that's why I feel like since 2000 and certainly 2016, but probably before that, we are devolving into arguments just about, oh, well, if you think this, you're racist, you're a fascist. We're just a bunch of name calling loyalists to whatever team we happen to be backing. And the idea that we're going to apply critical thought and criticism, most importantly, to the people that we believe in. Most importantly, it is most important for us to criticize the people that who are supposed to be representing us. So if you're a Republican, you should be far more critical of bad Republican policy. And if you're a Democrat, you should be far more critical of bad Democrat policy. We should be mostly critical of the people that we are supporting, because they should earn our support. And instead, it's the exact opposite. We don't apply any criticism to the team that we happen to identify with. And that's the danger of like what's going on in our political system right now. That's why we don't have the ability to have these kinds of conversations. I think that's why we're not getting, you don't get better politicians until you demand better politicians, right? Everybody knows that Nancy Pelosi is an inside trader. She's the best trader in the history of the world, but she keeps getting reelected, even though Democrats hate that. They hate the insider trading. They're probably better on that than Republicans are in terms of their outspoken opposition to our elected officials being able to trade on the knowledge and the power that they have. And they're 100% right on that, but they keep electing the people who are doing it. Right. And all I hear from Republicans when I bring up the deficit that Trump is responsible for and all the money that got spent under his presidency is defense of Donald Trump. He's responsible. He had the vaccine that was developed under Donald Trump. And I can't help but think that had Trump won in 2020, the argument about vaccines would have been flipped. You saw it from Democrats prior to the election saying, I don't know if I'm going to trust a vaccine that was developed under Donald Trump. And then once Trump lost, it was like, everybody should take this thing. This is the greatest thing ever. And then the Republicans were like, it was the worst thing in the world and don't take the vax, get the jab, da, 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 da. And all I could think of is if Trump had won and this vaccine was developed while he was president, the Republicans would have been the ones like, line up, get the vax. What are you doing? And the whole conversation, I think, would have shifted. Blue and red would have flipped their positions on that issue because their team would have been in power. And I don't know, that's a pretty sad state. That's a pretty sad state to me. And that is the state of political discourse in this country right now. And that's a pretty serious problem. I'm just going to look for some other stories here. We can maybe, look at that. Trump admits he lost in 2020. That's an interesting story. Well, duh, about time. So federal court just dealt a blow is another story, blocking Biden from carrying out his second try at broad debt cancellation. It's an interesting thing about the student loan debt. I brought this point up before when it comes to student loan debt, where you have like, I don't know, over $1 trillion worth of student loan debt sitting out there. Right. And so let's say we forgive all the student loan debt for these students, for these kids. They're not even kids anymore. You got millennials who are going to get debt forgiven. That's still floating around out there. You know what I mean? But let's just say, for example, we go out there and we're going to forgive all this debt. And I'm trying to explain to people that this is not going to be the panacea that you think it's going to be in regards to your financial well-being. You're just going to be pushing people who are on the sidelines in the economy right now because they have student loan debt, and they're in the market, and prices are going to rise. All of this stuff is demand side. All of it is. All of this is demand side stuff when we're in this incredibly powerful inflationary environment, and all we're getting proposed from the left is demand side solutions, which like, let's make more money available to more people. Well, that's not fighting inflation. You have to solve the inflation problem. And I'm telling you, we just had this bad jobs report come out, and the Federal Reserve is going to lower interest rates. That's coming. And the inflationary spiral that's going to come from that everybody's going to feel that. And I don't know how the modern monetary theorist people are going to tell you that it's okay that we can print all the money that we want to while prices are actually rising. And I don't care what inflation report you're reading. I think when everybody goes to the grocery store, everybody's trying to buy a house, everybody's trying to pay the bills. I think we know we're living in a powerful inflationary environment. I don't know how when the Fed lowers interest rates and brings a bunch of people back into the marketplace and borrowing starts picking back up, how you're going to be able to defend that position, how you're going to be able to defend taking that position. That the issue is that we need to pour more money onto this economy. I can't help but think that at some point we're going to wake up, but I don't know. I don't know if it's going to have to take an actual currency crisis in the United States to solve this problem, or if it's just going to be this long, slow burn where we're going to be able to just keep pretending that we'll just keep pretending that everything's okay. So I don't know. It's going to be tough. Anyway, we can walk down I always like to walk down my list as I get towards winding this thing down. Jesus, my face is huge. God, I hope most people are not watching this on a big monitor and are watching on their phone. Good Lord. I got to get my cameras dialed in so that my face isn't just like, bro. But I like to walk down my little list here. So the Epstein thing, I think we can put that away. Nothing's going to happen there. Promotes perpetual war. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to end up taking that check mark away. I'm going to have to take that check mark off of the Republican side. I think the Republicans are moving into this direction of this America First movement amongst the Republican Party, within the Republican Party, is taking the Republicans out of this perpetual warfare deal. Now, just because they're leaving the realm of promoting perpetual war does not mean that they're going to spend less money on defense. We're still going to be spending nobody's talking about defense budget cuts. Not Trump. Nobody's talking about it. We don't cut the military budget. So while they may not promote perpetual war by engaging in a bunch of new conflicts, the Republicans have no desire to cut defense spending at all. And that dovetails right into never stop spending. We are not arguing about a balanced budget versus running deficits. We're arguing about how large the deficits are between the two different parts. Well, this part, your guy had deficits this big. Well, my guy's deficit was only that big. They're both spenders. They're both going to run up the deficit. That's not going to change. And that's a real shame. There's no party of fiscal responsibility anymore. Like I said, Trump talks a good game when it comes to deficits, but he's got a 4-year track record as president of the United States that tells me he's not that guy. So I don't trust him to do it. I love his rhetoric when it comes to slashing the size and scope of government. I love his rhetoric. I don't trust him to do it because he didn't do it last time. Some people will point to the fact that he wasn't experienced. He didn't know how to navigate DC when he was elected. He thought he could surround himself with longtime Beltway people and navigate, negotiate his way through that, and that it'll be different this time. We'll see. He's got 4 years of experience. I don't trust him on it because even if he didn't understand it when he first got elected, in the second half of his presidency, he didn't do it. Not that, I'll be the first to admit his hands were kind of tied in 2020. There wasn't a lot he could do. He could have refused to pass the CARES Act. But I think at the end of the day, he felt like if he didn't pass the CARES Act, he wasn't going to get reelected. But bottom line is, I don't trust him on slashing the size and scope of government. Spies on Americans, nobody's talking about this. Nobody is talking about this in terms of we need to push back against our intelligence agencies. We need to, revisit the Patriot Act, the NDAA, all these different things, warrantless wiretaps, and the surveillance that we're all under from the state. Nobody's talking about it. Republicans and Democrats, hand in hand on spying on Americans. I challenge anybody to show me the rhetoric where that's changing. Maybe Vivek Ramaswamy talked about it a little bit, but nobody's really talking about that stuff. And I think privacy in the age of AI, in the age of the next iteration of technology, privacy is going to become incredibly important. And nobody's really talking about it. Owned by Big Pharma. That's another one. I watched a fascinating interview on Impact Theory today, actually, where they were talking about Big Pharma and the healthcare industry. And it's insane. Like something like, I'm going to misquote the numbers probably, but something like 90% of our medical expenses in this country, something like 80% of our healthcare expense, something like that, are being spent on chronic disease. And he brought up this really good point about American healthcare, where we have this miraculous healthcare that can do amazing things in terms of saving lives and treating disease and all that. So the American healthcare system has come up with a ton of amazing innovations, but at the same time, it has not done anything In fact, chronic illness in this country is just skyrocketing. Diabetes, diseases related to inflammation, hypertension, heart disease, all these different things are skyrocketing. And like our pharma and food industry is so corrupted and in lockstep with, they've co-opted the institutions that are supposed to protect you, the FDA, the USDA. These entities are completely co-opted by by corporations seeking to increase profit, that we're literally being poisoned. And healthy people are not good for big pharma. Healthy people are not good for big healthcare. And I've always been an advocate for health insurance companies as somebody who works in the insurance industry, not the health insurance industry, but the auto insurance industry. Understanding the moral hazard of a third party payer, I've said, well, look, health insurance companies are the only ones who care about keeping you healthy, but then they can only keep, I guess I want to say that they can only keep like 15% of the money they receive in premium, like 85% of it, something like that, has to be paid out in claims or something like that. So it's this weird, again, pushing a string analogy where it's like the health insurance companies don't want you to get too healthy, because if they're not paying claims and they have to reduce their premium, the amount of money they collect in premiums. This is something I want to do a little bit of research on over the weekend and maybe revisit on Monday. I'm going to try and get on here tomorrow night, but I have soccer practice with the kids, so, and I'm the coach. But so there's no entity in the United States that wants to keep you healthy. And the doctors, I think he said something like 70% of doctors who graduate from medical school, 70% of the medical school graduates graduate without taking any nutrition courses. And so like, we don't understand the healing power of food and diet and lifestyle. And we're so quick to write prescriptions, and nobody's really fighting back against that. And the Democrats, they message that better than the Republicans do, because they're like, well, we're going to push down prescription drug prices and we're going to push down the cost of insulin and all this stuff, but they're not really pushing down the cost of it. What they're doing is saying that Medicare is not going to pay, like, right. So what they're saying is they're pushing down the out-of-pocket expense, not the actual expense. And they're socializing the rest of the expense. They're not cutting into big pharma's profits. They're just socializing that cost instead of actually taking on big pharma by, getting rid of some of these evergreen patents and allowing more competition in the marketplace. The pharmaceutical companies are very much protected by the state, owned by the military industrial complex. I don't think we'd have to get too deep into that one. I've already talked about it a little bit. But nobody's talking about cutting defense spending. Nobody. There's not an anti-war party. I would say the Republicans, again, have drifted more towards being anti-war than the Democrats. It's kind of a weird shift. But even, like I said, even if we don't engage in new conflicts, we're not cutting the defense budget. We're going to keep spending the same amount of money. $1 trillion+ that's not going away. We're going to keep dumping money into those things. And at the bottom line is, these people don't really, this system is not designed to care about you. It's not designed to prioritize the well-being of the American people. It is designed to incentivize politicians, but to just do whatever it takes to get reelected. Something like, I think Reason, released a study that said something like 70% of the time that a politician spends in office is just trying to get reelected. They spend 70% of their time trying to get reelected, raising money, campaigning. That's where they spend the majority of their time. They're not out there working for you. They're not out there trying to make your life better. They spend the majority of their time trying to get reelected. And I think that's pretty obvious. So at the bottom of that list is the fact of the matter is, while you can have a good politician here and there, while I'm not saying that every single one of them is evil and doesn't care, it doesn't go. I think that when you get elected, you may be ideological and want to do good things. But I think once you are there, you get co-opted by the system. And anybody who served more than a few terms in Congress or the Senate has been co-opted by these forces. You get your exceptions. Obviously, as a libertarian, I look at Ron Paul and I say, maybe not that guy. But you can't point to very many people who, I look at AOC. I didn't like anything AOC had to say when she got elected. Her economics, I don't agree with any of it. I'm a free market guy. She's obviously has more of a socialist bent to her. She's a kind of a left side, demand side. Uh, that's where her thing comes. That's where her ideology lies. So I didn't agree with it, but I did feel like when she first got elected that she was ideologically pure. She believed in what she was trying to do. And I think I saw a report today that her net worth, like when she was elected, she was a broke bartender, and now her net worth is $29 million, and that's over the course of like 6 or 7 years that she's been in the spotlight there. So she's not that person anymore. She has been co-opted, and they all do, and they get co-opted by this beltway way of thinking, this Richmond, North Richmond, and all that stuff. They get co-opted by that, and then their whole identity is nothing more than self-interest, and that's all they've got is self-interest. Um, and that's it. That's American politics. And we're not a solution based. We don't have solution based politicians because we're not a solutions based electorate. We're not demanding solutions to the problems, and that's why we're getting what we get. I've always been an advocate of like you get the government as a society, you get the government you deserve, and right now we have the government we deserve, and that's harsh, but um, we're the ones who vote. It's at the end of the day, the responsibility lies with the voters. We keep reelecting them. We keep putting them back in office. So the responsibility lies with us. We've just got to be better as voters. We need better voters equal better politicians. And so I guess I will end on that note. I see that Ms. Vogel has stayed with me almost this whole time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We should drop a comment in maybe next time, but I am going to call it, and I'll see you guys either tomorrow night or Monday, maybe even over the weekend. And we'll catch